Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, especially those here in the Northeast, if you're in the middle of a snowstorm like we are. But we appreciate you joining. This is our third and final webinar of new plants for this year. I'm Ray DeFeo. I'm the sales manager here at Pride's Corner, and I also work directly with customers in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Western Massachusetts. I've been with Pride's 18 years, but I've been in the nursery industry for over 40 years. We're here to share some information with you on new plants, but also fruits in general. Evan Brand, our nursery manager, is with us. He may not have as many personal years in the business, but he comes from a horticultural family. So he's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. His father actually is a breeder of plants, which we've been fortunate enough to introduce some of them here at Pride's. And for my customers up in Maine, his uncle's actually the current horticulturalist at the Coast of Maine Botanical Garden. So Evan, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be here.
So we want to talk about fruit trees and other edibles for you. We know in the garden center, this is a lot of questions that your customers have and also your health. So we're here to give you that information on the new varieties and also fruits in general that might help you answer those questions. And it's not just trees for somebody who's got, 5 acres to put into an orchard. We're going to teach you ways how to use edibles just in your landscapes. So let's get started. Of course, we start with the most popular fruit, especially for us Italians here. Figs. Figs are not commonly found planted out in the Northeast, but down in mid-Atlantic and a little further south, you can have them out in your landscapes. But if your culinary experience with figs is just fig Newtons and fig spread, there's a lot more to it. And the key issue with that, of why a lot of people may not have had a fresh fig, is figs need to ripen right on the tree. You can't pick them early like a lot of other fruits and have them ripen as you go. And that's why you won't find them a lot in, especially our large grocery stores around the US. You'll find them in little shops. So in figs, there's a lot of different varieties. Bensonhurst Purple is one of the most popular, and for our Midwest people, you might know it as Chicago Hardy. It's a good cold hardy variety. And a lot of figs, in the Northeast and Midwest, you'll have to plant in containers and bring them in the winter into an unheated space. That's where Phenomenal comes in now as a newer variety. Stays a little bit smaller, so it's a little easier to maintain. Evan, I know you get out on the farm a lot and see, so how are these in the fall in fruit production?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, especially once you hit that second year in a container, if you do it in a planter or in the ground, once that fig is a little more mature, it'll start to produce piles of fruit, and you'll get 30 to 50 figs on a plant that's 3x3. So it'll get to a point where if you like figs, you're going to have enough to scratch that itch, I think. And a little comment on the Phenomenal. It's definitely marketed as a compact form. It is truly compact. It's probably going to top out about half the size, at least in our experience in the nursery. Still has figs that taste just as good as the Chicago Hardy, which it came from, but it's a definitely good for a smaller garden space or a small patio if you have that.
Thanks, Evan. Moving on. A couple of other good varieties we have here is Italian Everbearer, another one with good reddish fruit. Again, that sweet fruit right from picking from the tree. And like, for us Italians in the afternoon, maybe with a glass of Prosecco, it's a good way to enjoy your figs. Little Miss Figgy is another one that's a mutation we found that stays a little bit smaller. So again, not quite as hardy as Phenomenal, but if for small spaces and small containers, it's a good one. And Vern's Brown Turkey is one of the dark brown fruits, which again is the type of fruit that's used a lot when they're doing the processing for the cookies and the jams and stuff. But it does produce heavy. It will give you a couple of picking times throughout the year, depending on the amount of sun you give it. They do like a lot of sun, so get them out. You know, if you're in a container, get them out on your deck or patio right in full sun. Anything else on those?
I would say that
Yep.
Sorry, Evan. They just had one quick question in the chat room. Anne Logan says, how far down does the hardiness go for both the fig cultivars that we have listed? Now we have some of the zones listed. I'm assuming that means it can be planted outside at those zones, but if we're bringing them inside, what kind of zone is for like this, for would they survive that kind of situation?
Again, it comes down to needing a lot of sun. If you can get even in zone 4, what you can do is start putting it out in the spring and early. But if you're going to have cold nights, be careful, bring it back inside to cover it. But the zones are for planting outside, but you can easily do a zone 4 and possibly even zone 3 if you have a good sunny spot for them. Extend again later in the season, getting that sunshine until they ripen. So you may have to be careful on some cool nights, bringing it in or covering it until the fruit ripens all the way.
I guess to add to that too, the way we're growing them in the nursery is with not a whole lot of extra care there. We're keeping them from getting really low, well into the teens temperatures, but a light frost or even low freezing temperatures aren't going to really affect these negatively. And I would say all of them kind of perform similarly. Will you get the best fruit if they're getting frost starting in September? Probably not. I would say that the most mature fruit, at least in the New England area, is going to be later in the fall on a lot of these. And so if you're looking to have it in a planter, you may need to baby it a little bit to get the season long enough for the figs to be truly ripe and hanging on the plant. So extending the season somehow, whether it's bringing it into your garage or having it in a protected area, is probably a wise choice.
Yeah, and the protection doesn't mean into your heated house. When you're protecting it over the winter, like Evan said, it's an unheated space. Just water it well. Even wrap a bag, plastic bag around the container to keep the soil moist through the winter, so it doesn't fully dry out. In regards to planting it outside, I had some early experience with this because I was able to grow up down the street from my grandfather, who came from Italy, came over when my father was 9. So I'm first generation. He actually had it planted out in Connecticut, would cut half the roots and lay it down and cover it in the winter, and then stand it back up in the spring. So there's different ways to make it so you can enjoy these fruits.
We have a couple more questions that came in. One was about disease resistance, if any of these are better disease resistance than others. And I guess me personally, I was just wondering, like, what kind of diseases do these figs typically have that people have to be aware of?
Really not too much as far as the way of disease pressure. I think the biggest thing that can happen sometimes is you'll get a little stem dieback. That can come from really sharp cold spells that stick around for a few days, or if the plants are in an area where they don't get good airflow, you might get some, especially with the figs being on there at the end of the season. If you leave a fig that's beyond ripe and starts rotting on the plant and you don't do that preventative maintenance, you may get a little bit of a secondary pathogen on there. The good thing with these, though, is that they grow super fast in basically any environment. So if there's any branch tips that don't look perfect or they look like there's some dieback, you can just cut it a few inches below there. And these things will put on feet of growth during the year in a container or planted in your yard. So not a hard thing to deal with.
So there's a couple questions on fertilization. I believe they typically would need like a slow release fertilizer. But are they a heavy feed
Yeah,
plant?
definitely.
And
if you see,
go ahead.
if you see them in a container, the amount of, you'll see feet, like I said, feet of growth during the growing season. And for that plant to get that much size and grow that much vegetation, obviously it's going to use a lot of fertilizer or some kind of feed. What they aren't is they are not very picky is what you give them, just something with a good ratio of N to the phosphorus and potassium. So as long as it's got a high nitrogen feed, you're going to see these things explode during the growing season.
And the last question we had was about trimming or pruning. Is there a certain time that is that these should be kind of pruned at?
Most of the, basically all of the pruning that we try to do with the idea of getting the best fruit set would be to do it dormant or as close to dormant as possible. The figs will form starting mid-season and will take weeks to ripen. So you could cut this mid-season and it'll put out a ton of new growth, but you're very unlikely to get more fruit on any branch that's cut during the season. So if you need to beat it back, if it's taken up too much room in the garden, you could cut it mid-season, but I would not expect fruit on those branches. So dormant is best.
And it is a long period for fruiting, so make sure, especially in a container, keep it watered, not overwatered, but keep good water while the fruit is in production so that it fills, it sizes up well. Because if they don't get enough water, you won't get a large fruit on them.
Thanks, guys. Gosh, I didn't think we would talk this much about
I told you this is the
awesome.
number one plant to bring up. Nobody wanted to believe me.
Just as a quick reminder in the chat box, if you could change when you're chatting, change it to everyone. I think when I first started, it was set to be hosts and panelists, and that way everybody can see your questions. And then they may be thinking the same thing, but don't want to ask it. So if as you're chatting, if you could change it to everyone, that would be great. Thanks.
And all questions are good. If you're thinking it, somebody else is. So please ask a question if you have it. Okay, now we'll move on to some more that we can get out in the gardens, especially up here in the east, the apples. There's always a lot of confusion about apples, what to pollinate with what. We will have some pollination charts for you on our webpage on what will help. But again, most apples, and even when you see fruits that say self-fruitful, all your fruits will give you better fruit production with a cross-pollination. You just want to make sure the bees have a chance to get from one flower to another to get that fruit set early on while it's in flowering. Most of your trees and shrubs will be in flower for a week, maybe 2 weeks, week and a half. So you have only that time to get your fruit set. So that's why you want to think about having multiple varieties in your garden of apples. And we'll go over some of the particulars and some of the other fruits, but that's your best answer to that.
And I think to add to the cross-pollination thing, everybody always will get a lot of questions for any plant that needs 2 different pollinators and how close do they need to be. Anywhere in your yard is fine. If you've watched the bees, they'll be going to every house on your street. So for the plant to need to be 10 feet apart, no, that's not true. Just somewhere in your property, as long as you have those multiple varieties, you should be seeing the benefits of the cross-pollination.
And one little trick about apples too, if you only have room for one tree, crab apples help with pollination on them also. So you can't, if there's a crab apple in your landscape and you only want one fruiting tree, you should still have good fruit set. First of the newer ones we want to offer is Frostbite. Again, for you up north that I work with, it's very cold hardy. Its parentage is a little not sure, but we've been working closely watching the plant breeding out at Minnesota and Cornell, so we can work with these hardy plants and offer them to you. The key I want to say about looking at new varieties, a lot of your customers may have their favorite apple name in mind. And if they expect to get a apple that looks like it does in a grocery store using those older varieties, they also will need to be spraying a lot. A lot of these newer varieties are more resistant to the diseases, and you won't have to use as much chemicals to get that nice looking fruit.
And a kind of fact about this particular variety, it's relatively new to the world of apples. It was introduced in 2008. It's actually a selection that the University of Minnesota had this particular one since the 1920s, and they've used it as a parent plant for a lot of other breeding that they're doing. So obviously they've identified the set of traits that this has with the hardiness and the good taste as something they use as a foundation for lots of other breeding that they've done. And their program is extensive, so.
All right, next one. Gold Rush. For those of you like Evan who are a yellow delicious or golden delicious fruit eater, you know those fruits don't tend to last that long before they start getting soft, mealy. So this is an improvement over the golden delicious. It's going to give you, it's much more resistant to disease. So if you like that yellow fruit, I would switch over to Gold Rush.
And this is it's a known issue with golden delicious or yellow delicious that they taste really good and then they don't have a great shelf life. The experiment stations for Indiana, Illinois, and New Jersey worked in a collaborative way and used golden delicious parent as one of this, and then did seedlings from those with tons of different other varieties to try to develop basically a golden delicious 2.0. And this is what you get. It matures a little bit later and the flesh is a little bit more firm. So this apple will have a much better shelf life. If you've tried Golden Delicious, after about 2 weeks, they're soft and kind of mealy. This should last throughout the rest of the fall. So it's definitely a complete improvement over the parent.
I have a quick question about the frostbite disease resistance. What do you guys know about it being resistant to fire blight? And how does it compare to Liberties? Is a question from Ann Logan.
I would say that one, there's a little less research with frostbite on the fire blight susceptibility, but I'm pretty sure that one's in the better than average category. I mean, there's some that are really bad. There's some that are really good. That one's, I think, in the you're pretty safe to plant it anywhere group. I will look into that, but I believe we're in the better side on that one.
And one more quick question was Jane asked, she said she'd heard that only white flowering crab apples will pollinate fruiting apples. Does either of you guys know if that's, I never heard that before. You ever heard that?
I don't believe that to be true now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, now moving on, when you get past your Johnny Appleseed varieties of Macoun, Macintosh, the older varieties, Honeycrisp has sort of become the new standard of flavor for apples. It's a great apple with one little drawback. It, like some of the Golden Delicious, it doesn't hold as long as some of the other apples out there. It's a great tasting apple, but it does require, eat it quicker and have some others that last longer in the season. And it is hardy. It's being used as one of the parents for a lot of some of the other varieties you're going to see coming up because of its flavor. It does have that little bit sweeter of a taste. So it's a great apple for that. Now, Pink Lady. Pink Lady's been around for a little while. Another one that's been shown to be pretty hardy for temperature wise. In some areas, it's known as Crips Pink, but that's only if it's pink enough. So if the fruit gets enough sun and turns into a nice color, they can call it Crips Pink. If it doesn't, then you can call it Pink Lady. This is one, though, as Evan has pointed out before, that not as quite resistant to fire blight.
No, I mean, anybody that's had these apples probably thinks they're delicious. In my opinion, they're one of the best tasting apples out there, but with the flavor comes some drawbacks that just need to know about.
Yep. Triumph. As we said, this is one of the ones that Honeycrisp, and this was crossed with Liberty. So again, trying to develop that disease resistance strength from Liberty with the taste of Honeycrisp. So that's where Triumph comes along. Again, a newer variety. Not many homeowners will know about it. Probably not many of you know about it, but it's one that we found has been very good disease resistance. And this one came from Saunders, or
I did believe it originally did, yeah.
Yeah, we have partners down in Virginia that we work with. We work with some nurseries around the country, and this came out of Saunders down in Virginia. So this is another good new variety to get your customers to learn about.
And to give you an idea, that particular farm has got hundreds and hundreds of acres of apple trees in an orchard setting, not in a container setting. And they've definitely made some a shift towards some of these newer varieties. They still grow the old standbys that people ask for by name, but as far as the quality of the fruit, you can see there's a shift towards these newer crosses because they're just better production apples in the home landscape and in a nursery or a orchard landscape too.
Yeah, this was developed again out in Minnesota, but Saunders has, like Evan said, has used it out in their orchards for some of their production.
I have a couple questions if you want to, we're going to go back to Honeycrisp real quick. Emily Whalen asked, she says they've had issues with black spots on Honeycrisp fruit, and she was wondering if you had any advice for dealing with that.
Oh boy. That may be a whole nother webinar. So a lot of the varieties, especially the older ones, can get spotting. A lot of it depends on if you're using some kind of spray program in the location where the plant is. There are there's tons of information out there. We can connect after the webinar, or you can look up on some of the big university, like Washington State has lots of apple and orchard information. University of Minnesota does, to find things that are compatible with things that you're going to eat and be able to spray same season. But a lot of that is the older varieties need a spray program to manage that spot. If you plant them without that, you can expect that they'll have some blemishes, or they won't be that perfect apple that you see in the pictures here.
They'll still taste good though.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, thank you. And Adriana asks, if you have room for 2 apple trees, would you suggest planting one crab apple? She says, doesn't make that much of a difference if you just plant 2 apple trees.
No, I mean, if you're looking for apples, I would plant 2 apples.
Yeah.
I think the point Ray was making is that if you have crab apples in your landscape, they will also fit the role of the cross pollinator. But
Yeah. And if you want 2 apples, but only want one variety that's your favorite, and you want 2 trees of that, if you have a crab apple, that will help with that cross pollination. So it's not like you would have to you don't have to sacrifice the number of apples.
Okay. And Dan Miller asks, he says, did you find 2024 to be particularly bad for juniper apple rust?
a lot of that depends on, so anybody not familiar with that, the cedar apple rust involves the 2 hosts that make up the life cycle, which is something in the apple family, which can not necessarily be malice. It could be something like Amelanchier, and then juniper, especially the native Juniperus virginiana. The easiest way to avoid that is to plant them in separate areas, not have them in the same landscape. If you see out in the wild, there's a lot of times areas where they're growing side by side and they look horrendous. Definitely in that rainy sort of midsummer climate that we had this year, there was times where it blew up, but the easiest way to avoid that is to just not plant them side by side. So it was an average year, and then the fall was super dry. So for us, but obviously each year is going to be a little different. But the biggest way to avoid it is planting them separately.
We actually have them on separate farms.
Yeah.
So we try to avoid that problem.
What about the semi-dwarf rootstock? Jane asks, what's our size estimates for semi-dwarf rootstocks? That's a great question for apples.
Okay, so there's a variety of semi-dwarf rootstocks, but they're all very similar in that there are some that will dwarf the plant down to like a 10 to 12 by 20 kind of size, and some of them will go up to maybe about half of the size of the apple if it had just a regular rootstock, which could be 60 or 80 feet. So the idea is with the semi-dwarf rootstocks, all the rootstocks that we're using, probably your end goal, if you did no pruning or no maintenance on the tree, is like a 20 by 20 tree. If you're going to do some correct pruning throughout the life of that tree, you could probably keep it more like an orchard size, which is that 12 to 15 foot range, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Evan said, with sprays, apple pruning could probably be a whole nother webinar
Yeah.
also. So, but again, that's sort of something I do want to bring up. Pride isn't here just to sell you plants. If you have questions, if you need information, your Pride sales team can help you with that. If they don't have it right away, we'll get it for you and get it so you have it for your help and your customers. We're here to partner with you because if you sell more plants, we'll sell more plants. So we're here to partner with you and give you as much information as we can. So back off the Honeycrisp question. Here's how you solve that problem. Kindercrisp, again, is Honeycrisp is one of its parents and does have better disease resistance. It's a little bit smaller of a fruit than Honeycrisp is, and it ripens in probably late August in the Northeast. So it's that you can enjoy it right when the kids are about to go back to school. So, and it does store better than Honeycrisp.
Yeah, so you'll probably see this plant. This would fall into that early season apple category, and it will probably still have a better storage life than a Honeycrisp that ripens a couple weeks later. It's just an improvement on the longevity on the shelf or in your refrigerator.
Snow Sweet, again, another one working even better for cold hardiness up to zone 4. Another one out of Minnesota. It's sweet with a little tart, and it does hold the white color when you cut it. So if you like making fruit salads and things like that, this is a good variety to have because it's going to hold that white flesh longer before it starts browning. Even though it doesn't lose the taste, it just may not look as good when you cut it.
And this variety too, another one it's not brand new, but it was released in 2006 again by the University of Minnesota. You can see a theme here. It has its parents it's two relatively old varieties that are not seen much in production now, and the names escape me, but it was they used some older traits that they were looking for and found one that they think is an improvement on both. So
Zestar, again, another Minnesota introduction. And here's one that will hold for a long time, up to 2 months in the refrigerator. Again, it's been around for a while, but it's been bred so that you have that early season apple again. So you can, again, extend your season by having apples that ripen at different times in your gardens so that you can have fresh apples right through from August into September, October.
And just as one of the goals that the University of Minnesota had been looking at or is continuing to look at with their breeding program was to find the need that they perceived was that most of the early season apples that existed, the old varieties, were inferior to the mid and late season because they ripened early, but they just didn't last very long. So one of the initiatives they had was to find ones that could check that early season box, but also not degrade very quickly once they were picked. So this is kind of the result of that. And they had worked on this plant in the early 1970s, and they took over 25 years of evaluation to decide that they really liked this variety. And it was released in 1999. So there's definitely a lot of research. They've looked at an array of different seasons, and there's a lot of science and time put into these.
Just again, reasons why we think you should look at some of the, even though your customers may not be asking for them, why you might want to offer these other varieties to your customer. Especially, we want them to be successful once they bring them home. And so the less chemicals they need to use, the better fruit production they get. This will keep them happy and keep them coming back to you.
I have one more.
And it was a,
Go ahead.
was there a question?
Yeah, I do have one quick question. About the non-browning. Let's see. Lorraine asks, is Snow Sweet a GMO that prevents the browning?
It is not.
No, it was just done with breeding. That, I mean, it wasn't, again, with the breeding, they do a lot of different crosses. They see what comes out of it and just keep testing the apples and looking for these features. And this one they found that was one of the features they found when looking at this apple.
It was just selected out of thousands of seedlings that they grew, that one was the best in terms of not the having the oxidization that the other ones did.
Awesome.
And again, one last option for those who just have room for one tree, it's the 4-in-1. These are 4 apples that are grafted onto one stem. So you have your cross pollination right in place. And again, the other thing you have to remember with this is just be careful when you are pruning, because you don't want to prune one of those branches all the way back, because then you're down to a 3-in-1 apple. So, but it is great. In fact, this is another one going back to my childhood. My grandfather had actually grafted his own 5-in-1 apple in his backyard. So I guess this kind of business was in my blood.
We have a question on this from Claudia. She asks, what are the 4 varieties?
We're
trying to get through quicker, but yeah, you can. Yeah,
I don't want to answer that, Rob. We can get that information, and I can get it to your sales rep.
Each tree is different. Sometimes a lot of the places we work with, they'll have 4, 5, 6, 7 varieties they're working with. So each tree is going to have 4. They just may not all have the same 4.
Yeah, and they should be tagged when you guys purchase them. You'll see they'll have a tag on each branch that'll say what the variety is.
Yes.
But we can get that answer, but I don't want to answer it wrong right now. Because it's very.
We're not trying to be evasive, but it is.
No.
It's just. It's a neat plant, but again, we can look through the varieties and like Evan said, each one will be tagged for you. Moving on, apricots, typically not what a lot of customers are looking for, but if you have somebody who's got a lot of space and is looking for something different, apricots are another great one to add to the home landscape. Again, you do need 2 varieties for better fruit production on apricots, and we offer a number of different ones. We didn't really have anything new, but we have probably about 6 or 7 varieties that we offer. So there's plenty to choose from. Cherries. Here's where you got to start taking notes. There's sweet cherries, which are good to eat right off the tree. And then there's sour cherries. That's good for your pies. The sour cherries, typically, it's a little misnomer, but they will get sweeter the longer you leave them on the tree to ripen. So if you can be patient and you can beat the birds and the chipmunks to them, the sour cherries will be a little sweeter if you leave them on. The thing is, you need, a lot of cherries might be self-fruitful, but for cross-pollination, sour with sour and sweet with sweet. And for those who don't have a lot of space, this is a new introduction for us. We have a series of calling them dwarf or bush form. So these are some sour cherries that, you can put in a smaller space. They only get about 6 feet tall, and they are very hardy, down to zone 2. So any one of our customers listening here, you can grow these plants.
I think so a little background on this series. There's quite a few in this series. We have 3 that we're offering this year and probably more moving forward. This whole series was developed at the University of Saskatchewan. The cross is from the European cherry, which is what our typical sour cherries that we are talking about here are, and another species of Mongolian cherry, which basically tastes awful, but it's really hardy, and it has the dwarfing aspect. So through careful selection of that breeding, they were able to get the dwarf and hardiness from one side and the taste from the other. And actually these, especially like the other sour cherries, if you leave them long enough on the plant, they can get a Brix that's almost that of a sweet cherry. So they'll be sour, but will almost have the same sweetness of a sweet eating cherry if you pick them when they're fully ripe. So it can check a lot of boxes.
We had a
Here,
quick
yep.
question about Cupid before we move on to Crimson Passion. Let's see. Julie asked, is the Cupid variety sweet or sour?
Again, these are all three of these that we have. They're classified as sour, but like we were saying, if you leave them long enough, they can get that a little bit sweeter taste when if they ripen fully on the tree.
Kind of like a middle ground almost.
Yeah.
And these are new at Prides. I know I'm excited to plant this in my own yard. But Natalie has another question about it. She was wondering how it handles leaf curl opposed to the larger cherries. Do you have any insight on that?
We didn't really see any difference between aside from the growth habit, we didn't really see any difference in the production of these plants versus the traditional tree form cherries. They looked pretty good. They stayed pretty clean. And I think with it being a shrub form, you may not have some of the you may not see quite as much of the abuse that the upright peaches or anything prunus gets from rain or hail or any of the weather events that cause other bacterial or fungal issues. So it seems to me like they're going to be pretty all around resistant to problems.
Yeah, as Evan said, this is our first year with them. We can reach out to our suppliers and some people up, especially up in Canada, who have been growing them longer to find out if they've had any other issues. But again, that comes down to location sometimes. Sometimes you may not have something show up in one place, but different conditions, then they may show up. But as he said, we haven't seen any difference to this point. Crimson Passion, a little bit brighter fruit. Again, a lot of the same qualities as the other ones. So again, if you want, we have 3 varieties, but if you haven't ordered them yet, there's one variety I think we're pretty much sold out of.
I can't remember.
But we still have 2, so you can get, and Valentine is the brightest red of the 3 that we have. As Evan said, we're going to have probably more like 5 or 6 varieties next year. So we are sold on this as a good option for the homeowners with the hardiness and the size if they want to have cherries in their backyard.
Note add here that they are self-fertile, but again, will do better when planted near other cherries. So if you were to put a couple of this romance series together of different varieties, you'll probably get better fruit set in all of them.
All right. And now into a tree form, we did put one in that we've had for a few years. This came out of Bailey's, again, out of Minnesota. Sweet cherry pie. A little bit deceiving name because it is a sour, but it is one of the sweeter sours. And again, leaving it on the tree will enhance that sweetness. And it will make a good pie. And it stays compact too. It's not as compact as the last varieties we were showing, but for tree form, this is only gets about 15 feet.
I would say if anybody that's seen this in the past, this tree grows well, meaning it grows quickly like all cherries, but it doesn't get that kind of out of control growth that some of the older varieties do. It's a nice presentation kind of on its own with a little bit less, you don't have to beat it into submission.
Peaches, again, probably after apples, probably the most asked for fruit in the garden center and here at the nursery. The one good thing about peaches and nectarines, you only need a single tree. They are pretty well self-fruitful. You will, again, get better fruit production with other varieties nearby, but you can get good production just on one. I moved to Connecticut back to Connecticut a few years ago and bought an old house that had an old peach tree in it. The stem was rotted out through the center, but it was still producing fruit. So it was a tough old tree, but they're good for the home production. Canadian Harmony, another one good for hardiness. as the name might suggest. It's got good flavor too. A lot of people up north, they're always looking for Reliance, and we sell out of that the quickest. But Canadian Harmony and a couple of others we have are good fill-ins if you can't have Reliance or you want to plant something along with Reliance. And the other good thing about Canadian Harmony is a freestone for those, peaches. There's a couple different types. If you like the pit to come out real easy, you look for a freestone peach. And this is one of the better ones that we found.
Quick question about nectarines. Says, do any of the peaches, nectarines or apricots cross-pollinate each other?
They will. And a lot of it comes down to then more when they're flowering. Because as long as the trees are flowering at the same time, because again, there's early, mid, and late season on all these fruits. So you just want to make sure you have overlap of flowering. The other trick I learned from an old-time orchardist, especially in the Northeast or any colder regions, peaches and nectarines tend to flower a little later in the spring. So or early in the spring, you got to be careful about those late frosts. Plant them high. Frost, as you know, settles into valleys. So you have a better luck if you have a different elevations on your property, plant them on a higher elevation, more airflow, a little less chance of that late frost affecting the flowers.
Another question from Anne. She has a question. She says, have you seen cytospora canker issues in Connecticut in peach cultivars among the growers and commercial producers?
No, I mean, excuse me. As far as the different cankers that on the peaches, I mean, that's a tough one because a lot of those, if you see it on your plant, the best way to approach that plant is to discard it. In many cases with some of those problems. So we have a basically zero tolerance policy for that on the plants that we're growing, as do the people that we get the stuff from, so to supply it. And I think that's the way that I would phrase that, is that it's just something you do not want in your orchard, in your container nursery, and nor do the people that are growing the starts want to be supplying that. So has it been clean? Yes, we've done really well keeping that away from our nursery, and I think that the producers that are growing the bare roots for orchards and for us are also doing that. I think probably the risk is more if people have containers that they leave over, sometimes in a retail setting or something that's not on a necessarily on a program or the perfect irrigation schedule. So but the goal is to have zero of that here, and I think that we're doing that. So kind of a long-winded answer.
Yeah.
One more question actually that goes back to apricots. Sorry, Suzanne, I didn't see it up there. She says, I cannot find apricots on the spring availability. When will they be available to order?
Check.
I'll have to check whether we sold out of them or not, but I'll double check. Just check, give a question right to your direct sales team, and we can get you that answer.
And a lot of, I guess, to add to that, a lot of times we'll have the next crops becoming available late spring or very early summer. Yeah. So not exactly for the spring time frame, but we'll have a ton of availability hit in that June 1st-ish area. So just if we can't find it now, we will have it shortly.
And again, talk to your salesperson so they can let you know when that new crop is ready. Get the name from your customer who wants it, and you can call them back in, have them into your garden center another time when they're typically not there. Back into some other peaches, and they were talking about nectarines. This is one that gets a little closer to nectarine. If you don't like the fuzz on peach, Glowhaven has a lot less fuzz on the skin. So I know that bothers some people, especially my granddaughter, but but this is one that you might be able to do. Again, self-pollinating, but will do better with a cross pollination. So this is Glowhaven. And here's Reliance, again, not a new plant, but one of the most reliable for the northern region for fruit production. So I just wanted to throw it in there to
Standard.
it's the standard when it comes to peaches in New England, especially northern New England. Getting into some of the nectarines, this is one that I wanted to highlight for being a good white-fleshed nectarine, which you don't find a lot of. Again, both peaches and nectarines will be the yellow flesh or white flesh. Some people really prefer that white flesh. They think it's a little sweeter. And then there's the thing about peaches and nectarines, it's the lean test. When you're eating a fresh peach, how far do you have to lean over before so you don't get the juice dripping on you? That's how to tell a real good peach when it's ripe. And this is one we still can't understand why they use this name because of the disease fire blight. This is Prunus fire bright. It's another very heavy producer for nectarines, freestone fruit. So it's another good one if you want to add some nectarines to the orchard. Again, a little better with disease resistance also. And Hardy Red is probably the most resistant we found to the leaf spot. Larger fruit, and it's another good. So this is Hardy Red.
I have a couple questions about peaches. Tim Bellamy asks, will we see any more flat peach varieties in the future in our production planning?
Good question.
A lot of that comes to our suppliers as to what we can find from the, from our bare root tree suppliers.
Yeah, there's definitely demand there that we recognize. Being able to find that enough starts to get a significant amount has been the challenge there.
But we are on the lookout for
Yes.
it.
And are any of these peaches that we talked about more resistant to diseases than others?
Again, look at some of the newer varieties. Reliance is the old standard, but you do need a little more spray program with that. Those are ones that, those newer varieties I brought up early were the ones that I would recommend for that.
Get those other three.
Yeah.
That Canadian Harmony.
Yep, Canadian Harmony. I think Madison is another one of the newer ones. That is also a little more disease resistant.
Okay.
Plums. Here we go. That's another one that you got to be careful on. Because the European plums and there's Japanese plums. And you can't cross them. You won't get good fruit production if you only have one of each. So European needs to pollinate European varieties and Japanese varieties need to pollinate other Japanese varieties. So it's, and everybody knows that a prune is just a plum that's dried up. So that's, but there are some, we'll show you some varieties that tend to be better for if you like prunes for drying. Prunus elephant heart, we found, you can see by the shape of the fruit, looks like a big heart, but it does have one of the largest fruits that we found on plums. And it is very, very sweet. Italian, this is one that if you want prunes, they're a little bit smaller fruit, but they last well on the tree and they will do well for you if you want to get the prune.
I think it's listed that way on our bill.
Yeah. And it's one of the sweetest. But again, for me, what would you expect with a name like Italian too? So pears. Moving into pears, we have a number of varieties that we have here. Again, good. You need to best with cross pollination. You might get a little bit of fruit set on its own, but you definitely want to have 2 varieties. One I wanted to highlight is probably that we found is the hardiest. Again, you got to be a little careful in very northern New England or in upstate New York, those areas, some areas of the Midwest, that pears are a little tougher. They're not as hardy as a lot of apple varieties, but Moonglow seems to be one of the hardiest that we found. Vaccinium, the blueberry crop. Again, it's a native to the US. Try to find one that hasn't crossed somewhere out in the wild will be tough to find, but so planting cultivars is good. The other good use for blueberries, you know how burning bush has been left out of a lot of areas. Vaccinium is one that can give you that red leaf in the fall, so you can use it right in your landscape and have fruit and feed the birds. You got to be quick to beat the birds. Oops. Wrong way. But here we are, our first vaccinium, and it's not a blueberry. So this is one, vaccinium does also include cranberry, some huckleberry. There is huckleberry that's also Galaceca, but this one is Lingonberry. It's a very tart berry if you want. It's used mainly for jams, but the reason I wanted to show this one, if you're just looking for a colorful ground cover, this is one that'll give you some flowering, give you that red berry, and it will handle sunny or shady areas. So you don't have to eat the berries if you don't, but you'll feed the wildlife, but you can also have a colorful ground cover. Now we get into the blueberries. Blue ribbon, the winner. It's probably one of the largest fruits that we found on blueberries. So this is and it does have good shelf life with a firm bearing. So this is one you might want to get. Again, with blueberries, you're going to have that early, mid, and late season fruit. It also means you have early, mid, and late flowering. So people are always asking about which varieties to have for better fruit production. If you're only going to plant 2, you want an early and a mid, or a mid and a late. You don't want to try to have an early and a late. You may not have enough time of flower crossing, being in bloom long enough time together to get a better fruit set. You'll get some, they are a little bit self-fruitful, but again, to get that better fruit set, you want that overlapping time. And this will extend the season of how long you can enjoy blueberries in the backyard.
One other thing on the fruit set that maybe is intuitive, but maybe not. You'll see a lot of times you'll see blueberries growing wild. They are in full shade and they'll be about 8 feet tall and 1 or 2 branches. And what you do notice is they have very little in the way of flowers and fruit. They will grow fine in full shade, but you will be much better off putting them in full sun. You'll get much better flower and fruit set. So they can tolerate basically any amount of light or lack thereof. But if you're looking for fruit set, it should be 100% full sun.
Okay, this is the first one. I want to introduce our Bushel and Berry line of plants. Some of you have been with Prides for a while may have seen these first come out as Brazelberry. This is a line of plants that was developed out in the Pacific Northwest by Fall Creek Nursery. They are a main producer of fruits for orchards and berry growers, but they wanted a line of fruit for the homeowner, for the retail customer. So they wanted something that was a little more compact. As Evan said, full-size blueberries can be 8 feet tall or bigger. They wanted something that was self-fruitful with a strong production, but also tastes good and have another landscape feature. So this is where we start getting into something. And the thing I want to really talk to garden centers about, because a lot of you haven't really grabbed on to this as a program, you might mix these fruits in amongst your other fruits. this is one of the hottest selling brands of plants we have through our e-commerce fulfillment that we're doing. So the homeowners sitting home on a couch are the ones asking for these plants. So if you're not showing them to your customers coming into the garden center, you might be missing out on some sales. This and knowing the story of why. These can be grown in containers if you want on the patio and still have fruit production. You can have a small hedge. There's different ways to make these plants part of your landscape and produce fruit. Pink icing is one of the best leaf colors. It has a little bit of a pink tinge to the new growth, so it's adding a feature to your fruit production.
I would add that the Bushel and Berry, there's a fairly substantial number of varieties, most of which Pride's Corner grows. But of the two selections that we're going to show you, this is the showiest for sure. It has that kind of eucalyptus blue color and a real true pink new growth. So regardless of the fruit production, it's really stunning in the landscape mid-season. And then the next one that we're about to show, Perpetua, those are, if you had to pick two out of this series, these are the two to start with. So
as you can see from the picture on the upper right, Perpetua gets its name because it has almost continual fruit production through the summer. It definitely has two times of, two crops that you can pick. So even as the leaves are dropping, there's still fruit on the trees, on the bushes. So this can extend your fruit production. This is a little bit bigger in the Bushel and Berry plants. This one does get about 4 to 5 feet. So maybe not the best for a container, but if somebody's got a small yard or you don't want to have to worry about keeping it pruned down to have easier harvesting, Perpetua is the way to go.
We do have a couple questions that came in about overwintering and growing them in containers. Tim asked, how is the winter survival rate in containers and any special care that's needed to overwinter if grown in containers?
That's a good question. I think the first thing is to make sure it's in the right size container that has enough soil volume so that it doesn't freeze 100% solid and stay that way for months at a time. It's the plant is deciduous, but it still doesn't want to be frozen into a cement block for the whole winter. So if you're going to take a plant that's in like a 3x3 range, it needs to have a planter that's at least significant enough so that it stays thawed into the winter and thaws before April. As far as it's very similar to how we're growing them. We're growing them and there is no special care given to these. They're overwintered in just a hoop house with a single sheet of plastic. We put them outside starting in February and they'll go right up through until almost Christmas before they're covered. So they're really tough. The biggest thing is you wouldn't want a massive full-grown plant in a pot the size of a 5-gallon bucket. Just need to make sure as the plant grows, it has the right size planter.
And the other key to that is not so much the freezing, it's the freezing thawing. You want to move it into a protected spot.
Yeah.
Whether it's an unheated garage or just an area that's not going to heat up during the day too much, start thawing, and then get frozen when you get that real cold snap at night again. That's what's going to damage a plant and it's not so much damaging the top, it's going to damage those roots. If they start pushing a little bit of root growth, which is before you see top growth, so you may not notice it, and then you get an extended cold snap, that's what's going to damage a plant being kept in a container.
I know what I do with these in my own property is I dig a hole in the fall and I just drop it into the ground in its container, and that soil insulates that root for the winter. And then the springtime, I just take that container off, scrub it off, and then we're good to go for the rest of the season. So
yeah, no, that's another great way to do it. Again, just moderating that change in temperature. You just don't want it up and down all winter. And again, another good ground cover or type of plant. And also if you like to cook with blueberries, the angustifolium, the low bush blueberry, a staple up in Maine. This selection actually came from the University of Maine, gets a little bit redder leaf color. So again, a little bit more of a landscape feature. again, ground cover for a shady area, but as Evan mentioned, any fruits in a shadier area just aren't going to produce as much. So depending on if you're looking more for landscape or for fruit production as to how you would want to grow these. Definitely low, only about a foot tall. Bust your back harvesting unless you get a little rake. But they're fun to have. My kids used to love going out in the woods picking these and bringing bowls in so their mother could bake muffins for them or pancakes. So not fruit, and not something that you pick off, but this is the stem of the plant you eat. The rhubarb. Again, not new, but just letting you know we have it. And again, the key to rhubarb, don't eat the leaves. You'll get very sick. They're poisonous. But this, along with strawberries, my favorite pie. So strawberry rhubarb pie or jam cannot be beat in my mind. And I found out it's Evan's also.
It is definitely my favorite pie.
So you're missing out if you're not offering rhubarb to your customers. Those and figs. Now we get into some of the other berries, raspberries. Again, we have a number of different varieties, not so many new. Polana's been around for a while. Heritage has sort of been the standard that everybody looks for. But this is, Polana stays a little more contained, very hardy, zone 3. Got a nice sweet taste and a good sized fruit. And then if you like big fruits, this again is back into the Bushel and Berry. The other key feature about raspberry shortcake is it's thornless. Gets large fruit. Again, great container plant if you want to be able to sit on your patio and pick your fruit while you're just relaxing. This is a great one because it also fruits on new wood. A lot of raspberries typically won't fruit until the second year of growth on the cane, but this will fruit on first year wood.
And I've been really impressed with this one. A lot of the raspberries that we're selling to you guys are being sold the second spring after we've grown them the year prior. And during the first year, when we grow these from a tiny start, you'll see a huge amount of fruit production on these. So it definitely, not only does it fruit on new wood, but it fruits heavily on that new wood. So each year after that, it should really take off and you should get a ton of fruit off of it.
So
As
Jane,
you see, yep.
I'm sorry, Jane asked, and Evan kind of just spoke to it, but they asked if you can give them a streamlined version on best pruning practices for raspberries and black raspberries.
Okay, streamlined version is you need to know what kind of raspberry or black raspberry you have. There's 2 different groups. Basically, you can divide it into is primal cane rubus, which means that they have fruit on the first year or the same year wood like this. And then there's floricane, which are berries that will produce only on the mature stems from the previous year. The way you cut them is very different. If you have one that only fruits on old wood and you cut it in the spring, you're going to never have fruit. So you really need to know what you're doing. But the best time to do that with these older varieties that will fruit on the old wood is probably dormant, removing old canes that are either really thick and not really producing well, or they're ugly, or they've started to die back. But you're still maintaining enough of the 2-year-old stuff that will continue to make fruit. If it's a same year wood plant, the best time to prune that is probably right after it fruits. So right after you harvest the fruit, or dormant. So it really depends on which category of plants you have, but that would be the way to do it.
Yeah, when you're talking to homeowners, best way to put it is if they have raspberry plants out there, once they've picked fruit the second year off of a cane, cut it.
Yes.
And then the canes that are coming behind it are the ones that are left, and those will be the ones producing fruit
The second year.
second
the following
year. Yeah. So that's the easiest way to tell them what to do.
Alan
They'll
asked,
give you the technical part. I'll give you the. That's why we teamed up here
Yeah.
for you.
Raise the translator.
Alan asked, he said, can I plant a yellow, black, and red raspberry next to each other without affecting the fruit variety of the other varieties of raspberries? Like, do they interfere by cross-pollinating each other?
No,
No,
not at all.
it's actually good. Then you have a colorful fruit salad.
Yeah.
And we do have all those colors for you.
Yeah, the color will not change depending on what it's planted next to. Whatever color that raspberry or blackberry is, it will always be that color, regardless of what its neighbors are. So,
And then getting into blackberries, this is one that we just started growing a couple of years ago, I believe. It comes from actually proven winners. Taste of heaven. And I will have to admit that this is probably one of the sweetest blackberries I've tasted. We got to sample it a few years ago when we were out at Spring Meadow out in Michigan. And as you see from some of the pictures, the fruits are very large also. So very tasty, very juicy, very large. And again, Evan was just, these do produce on old wood. So don't cut it in spring. Don't cut off that first year growth, because that's what's going to fruit next year. Again, just throwing in one grape, old variety, but the Concord, but we do grow a number of different grapes if you want to round out the fruit production at the homes. And all the varieties we are growing are seedless. So if you don't want to have to be picking seeds out of your teeth, you can have these. And we have a few strawberries. These are some newer varieties that we've just been working with, again, through Bushel and Berry. Strawberries as all, they grow small, but wanting to get a little bit more for the landscape. This whole Bushel and Berry wants to be part of your landscape. So what these have are different colored flowers. You'll see Rosie Bell is pink, Scarlet, as the name says, is red, and Snowy is white. That all describes the flower color, not the fruit color. So you can have a blend of flower colors along with the fruit production. And as you see, some of them are done in hanging baskets. You can do them in gardens. You can do them in raised planters. So it's a great way to round out your landscape and your fruit production all in one. You have anything to add on these? You don't.
no, I mean,
Yeah, but again, we gave you a way to make all kinds of pies, all kinds of fruit salad, wine. We have other fruits here too, if you want to get into some of the others, even elderberry. But this is the end of our third new plant webinar. We hope you enjoyed our new format. In fact, please, for those who have been on these, if you haven't seen all of them, they have been recorded and are on our webpage. But we want your feedback. Have you liked what we've done? Would you like to see more? Just not, maybe we can give you more webinars throughout the year about different plant groups. Again, Pride wants to be your partner. We want to see you succeed and help you succeed. So please talk to your sales team with any ideas and any feedback on what we've done for you. If you have any other questions, we can hang on for a little bit here, or you can again give the questions to your sales team and we'll get you the answer.
Had a couple questions pop up in the chat box. One was looking for the pine berry, that white strawberry. And I know we've carried that in the past in I believe in our Goodness Grows program.
It was either good. Yeah, we have had it in the past. I'd have to check again. Sometimes it comes down to being able to find supplies of it.
there's very few people that
There very few produce that one. If there's a big demand, we can look into whether we can propagate it here, but that's something, so if there's something we're not growing, that's another thing to talk to your sales team on. We're always looking to add, as you see from our new plant webinars, we're not afraid to add new plants. I think we do about 300 a year, don't we, Evan?
Yeah.
I think it's closer
Or whatever
to
you can find
400,
room for,
actually.
So if you're looking for pine berries, let us know. Again, we can look into things, and if enough of us hear that people are looking for it, we'll find a way to get a source for it.
I think a cool fact about pine berry is that typically people who are allergic to strawberries can actually eat pine berries. So I think that was a fun fact to add in there. Another question was about mulberry.
Boy.
We currently we are only producing the non-fruiting weeping mulberry. I get asked about it every year. I think way back we did produce some, but I think it was before your time.
It might have been.
Again, we can look into it. It was a popular plant in this area of the state because mulberry is what they needed for silk production, and this is where they produced a lot of thread. So there was a lot of mulberries planted in Connecticut to take over the silk production, and then they had a real cold snap and they all died. So, but no, they will survive in this area. So actually, I think it was a disease came in and wiped them out, and so they did have a problem. But it is a great plant. I had a couple in my previous house and had to race the birds to get the fruit. And the full size mulberry does get quite large. There are weeping varieties that also produce, so we'll look in to see if we can find it. I know I've talked to our Denise, who gets our starts for Evan to put out in the nursery. She's asked around, but she can check in again and see if we can find some.
I know she's been responding to some of the questions on the chat, so I know she is listening today. So she'll she's great at finding those plants.
Yep.
She responded on it, Ray, so she's on it. I just want to thank you guys all for your questions. I know me and my marketing team, one of our focuses this year is to really try to make growing fruit trees and backyard orchards easier for you and your customers. You're going to be seeing a lot of the questions that you asked today. We're going to be adding that information to our website as a great resource for you. Going to create pollination charts, maybe a book to kind of talk about the varieties you grow. So any other feedback you have, please send it my way. And we're always trying to make it as easy as we can for you guys to sell these amazing plants.
And Allison, I know you've actually been saying you might even start using QR codes instead of trying to cram all that information onto a tag.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's where we're going to be going next year.
So again, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your business, and we look forward to a great 2025, and hopefully Mother Nature doesn't throw us too many curveballs like she has the past couple of seasons.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. We'll
Thank
be
you.
posting the video just as soon as we can get it processed, probably by Monday. And if you have any questions, reach out to your sales team. And thank you very much. Enjoy the snow day.
Thanks.